Kate Lamble.
Neil Rosell.
Together again, thanks to the BBC World Service.
Imagining we're like one of our guests in sunny California.
Cruising Sunset Boulevard.
With the wheel of a vehicle that cost a fortune to develop.
I thought, wow, this is seriously good. It felt like being in a spaceship.
His spaceship was in fact an electric car.
It was the mid-90s and Quentin Wilson was driving it for a TV show aimed at car obsessives called Top Gear.
And I remember a moment when a man with Oakley sunglasses in a turbocharged Volvo drew up to me next to the traffic lights and tried to race me, and this electric car just went off like a sprinter in absolute silence. And it was that moment, and I remember it clearly. This was the future, and I said so to camera, that this car is the beginning of a new era.
Make no mistake, the days of the internal combustion engine are definitely numbered.
We weren't talking about global warming. I saw them as just a significant technological leap.
Today, we are talking about global warming. Road transport accounts for 10% of emissions.
And far from reducing these emissions to help keep temperatures down, the UN says they're actually increasing faster than any other sector.
Many think electric vehicles, EVs, will throw that trend into reverse.
Whoa, you drive electric?
You can get from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. That's extreme, that's nuts.
I used to have a Mustang back when cars made sounds.
The all-new.
Change is in the air. Investors have poured an estimated $100 billion into EVs in the last couple of years alone.
Another $300 billion is expected by 2025. And political capital is pouring in too.
In the auto industry, Detroit's leading the world in electric vehicles. You know how critical it is?
US President Joe Biden.
Drastically improving the climate by reducing hundreds of millions of barrels of oil that will not be used when we're all electric.
But getting to all electric is a long road. EVs make up just 1% of passenger cars globally.
This is the climate question, so we're asking, are we putting too much faith in electric vehicles?
Love them or loathe them, cars are with us. There are roughly 1 billion of them on the planet right now, and we add tens of millions every year.
Quentin Wilson loves them.
I guess my love of cars came in the 60s when I was a kid and riding in the back of my father's car and sliding across the slippery leather seats.
Leather seats and fossil fuels. Quentin's conversion to electric came early among car journalists.
He's owned one ever since that fateful ride on Sunset Boulevard, even when the tech wasn't quite there yet.
I remember my wife telling me that the mums at the school gate when I took our kids to school would say, "Why does he drive that funny little car?" And there was this real kind of, what are you doing? You know, you're making a fool of yourself. And I would go on radio shows and try and be passionate and evangelical about it, and they would just laugh.
His early electric cars could go less than 80 kilometers on a charge. Today's top models can do more than 500 kilometers.
This is largely down to better batteries. Quentin says the technology will do more than transform the car industry.
Once you do that, Kate, then you do maritime, you do aviation, and then you do static energy storage. I mean, it sounds misty-eyed, but batteries will save the world, and it will mean that we will not burn stuff anymore.
There you have it, the zeal of a convert, a professional petrolhead turned EV evangelist.
But let's dig in to what he's saying. The chief climate credential of any electric car is that when you drive it, it doesn't belch planet-warming, lung-scarring fumes in the way that cars run on fossil fuels do.
But to understand an EV's full impact on the climate, you need to look beyond its life on the road.
You need to look before and after.
Heather McLean's done that. She's a professor of civil and mineral engineering at the University of Toronto.
So let's start then with the construction. Can you walk us through how an electric vehicle is put together until the point where it hits the showroom and someone says, "I want the red one"?
So as with any type of vehicle, raw materials are extracted to produce the steel, the aluminum, you produce the electric motor, and then for electric vehicles, the battery is a very large component. So in some of our studies, the battery represented about 50% of the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the production of a vehicle.
All cars have batteries, but the ones in EVs have to be much bigger.
And to make these big batteries, you have to dig up things like lithium, nickel, cobalt and manganese and ship them to a factory, potentially on the other side of the world.
So you have to burn a lot of fossil fuels to make a car that can run without them.
The environmental impacts of the battery production can vary depending on the electricity grid of the place where the battery is produced, because the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the electricity used to produce the battery are a fairly large component.
And most electric vehicles are made
in China, where about 60% of the electricity is produced still from coal.
Heather and her team compared the emissions from the production of two popular models, a Tesla Model 3,
which is an EV,
and a Toyota RAV4,
which is not.
And we found that the electric vehicle had about 50% higher greenhouse gas emissions associated with its production than the conventional vehicle.
Hang on! Are you okay, Kate?
This is why I don't normally let you drive, Neil.
That wasn't my fault.
Yeah. So EVs make climate change worse than those that run on fossil fuels.
In the production phase, up to the point someone buys one and drives it off the lot.
So how long do you have to drive it before not using gasoline makes up for those higher production emissions?
It really does depend. How much do you drive? It depends on the electricity grid that you're charging from. So if you had a very almost entirely renewable space grid based on wind and solar, for example, very quickly, a year or two, you'd probably have broken even and now be reducing emissions compared to the gasoline vehicle.
Okay, so a year or two on the road and an EV is better, under perfect conditions, but the real world is a messy place.
Take the US. 60% of its electricity comes from burning fossil fuels, largely natural gas. Would you break even there over the decade or so you keep your car?
In the US grid, it took under 3 years before our Tesla EV had slightly lower total emissions. When we got to the end of the vehicle's lifetimes, the electric vehicle had less than half the total emissions over the lifetime as the gasoline one.
Even if you ran that same electric vehicle off a grid that was heavily dependent on coal, say you were driving your EV around India or China, over the lifetime of the vehicle, its emissions would still be lower?
Essentially, as long as you had a portion that was not coal, you would eventually get to lower emissions.
This is why there's so much hype about switching to electric vehicles. In the long run, they're better for the climate.
Our EV evangelist, Quinton Wilson, hopes emissions from production can come down too, if battery factories can shift to renewables.
At a busy industry show in London, that's exactly what one company, Britishvolt, have planned.
So we're going to fix this problem by making low-carbon, sustainable, domestically produced, responsibly manufactured battery cells right here in the UK. We will be the first full-scale plant up in Northumberland. It's the greenest part of the country, where we have hydropower from the Nordics. So that is the exact reason we chose this national treasure of a site to build our factory, making these battery cells that can quite literally help save humanity.
Not everyone is jumping on the electric bandwagon.
Clarice Cunha-Link thinks cars themselves are a problem. She lives in Brazil and has spent decades campaigning for investment in public transport and walking and cycling networks.
There is a big movement here from the automobile industry as a whole and technology industry as well towards the clean electric vehicles.
Compare your lobbying power to that of the automobile industry.
Oh, wow, it's very small. We have very little influence compared to the automobile industry, so I think it's a gigantic crusade.
Clarice runs the Brazilian branch of the non-profit the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy and lives with her family in Rio de Janeiro.
My 11-year-old boy, he's always trying to find an electric vehicle in the street. It's quite funny. He has this obsession about trying to find the electric vehicles.
So when you're out for a walk and he's looking for the electric vehicles, are you like, hey, look, there's a bicycle. Oh, look at that person walking. Oh, there's a bus.
He, as all of us, are constantly bombarded by these images. You can all have our own smartphones and our own private vehicles, and this way we will not need to worry about the climate crisis. he's the whole time very seduced by that. And I find it interesting because if he's seduced by that and he has a mom who is an advocate, who's always talking about it, let's imagine how the rest of the population live.
Clarice's issue with the electric car revolution is really that. Let's imagine how the rest of the population live.
There is a reality that is very different from the global north to the global south. In the global north, we could say that the majority of trips in many places are already made by pollutant vehicles, and then migrating to electric vehicles might be a solution, right? That's not the situation in the global south. That's definitely not the situation in Latin America and not the situation in Brazil. What we have here is the majority of the population traveling by public transport.
And while more people are buying cars in Brazil, they're not buying electric ones.
The majority of the population here will not be able to buy an electric vehicle anytime soon. That's not going to happen in 10 years. That's not going to happen in 30 years.
There are lots of hurdles to getting people to buy electric, cost being the main one, but also, where do you charge them? How far can they go?
Put all those things aside for a second. Let's wave our magic wand.
And say everyone who already has their own petrol car gets it replaced with an EV.
Look under your seat. You get an electric vehicle. You get an electric vehicle. You get an electric vehicle.
Would that reduce emissions by enough to help us reach our climate targets?
Heather McLean looked into this question in the US and wrote a paper about her findings.
And the title of the article gives away a bit of the result. The title was Electrification of Light-Duty Vehicle Fleet Alone Will Not Meet Mitigation Targets.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, as the title suggests, our conclusion was no, or at least that doing so would require deployment of battery electric vehicles at a pace that exceeded, at the time at least, the most optimistic projections.
What Heather found was that to keep global temperature rise below 2 degrees, in the US, all car sales would need to be electric by 2035 and 90% of cars on the road would need to be electric by 2050.
Today, electric vehicles make up just 2.5% of car sales in the US and 1% of the total cars in use. But don't worry. There is another way to get vehicle emissions down.
I want to take you back to the mid-90s for another vision of the future.
As Quentin Wilson was whizzing around LA in that early electric vehicle,
I was about 10, so I couldn't drive, but I was sat near the Champs-Élysées in the centre of Paris, France. The roads were empty, but we were glued to a tiny portable television screen, watching and waiting for something to reach us. A flash of colour, the grinding of gears, the thrill of speed. I remember it clearly, this moment when cycling became the coolest thing in the world.
my experience of the Champs-Élysées is different. I've been there when the Tour de France isn't on, and it is just a huge road full of honking, fume-spewing cars.
Oh, yes, it is. No one ever goes there. And to be honest, having this amount of bicycles would be the dream, but at the moment we're not there.
Estelle Honorat is a journalist in the French capital.
She says things are changing. Paris is working on that dream.
The City of Lights is trying to become the city of bikes.
So at the moment, half of the space in Paris is devoted to cars. But most of the time, like 90% of the time actually, people use public transports or other ways to move around. So we only take cars to move 10% of the time. So there's a big gap.
And the pandemic has offered a big opportunity. While the roads have been relatively quiet, Paris has been spending hundreds of millions of dollars to develop the bike network. They've built 50 kilometers of bike lanes, and they've promised to build 180 kilometers more.
Which is a lot, considering how relatively small the city is. And it seems to be working. Estelle says the number of people travelling by bike has tripled in some areas over the last few years.
It keeps on growing. You can see there are cycles everywhere.
It's useless for me to take a car. I'm faster by bicycle. For me, the best way to move in Paris is a scooter or bike.
By walking or subway and sometimes riding.
But definitely not by car.
Inside the city, I don't need to have a car. And in my opinion, electric cars are not an ecological solution for the global warming.
This PV revolution isn't universally...
PV?
That's pedalled vehicles, Neil. I thought they needed to sound a bit cooler.
Oh, no.
This PV revolution isn't universally admired.
For everyone who finds it easier to hop on a bike and nip to the shops, there's someone else who has to commute a long way to work, or has a bad back, or small kids and all their stuff to lug around. What about them?
When you don't live in Paris, because you can't afford it, it's really hard to drive in Paris. If you go to work, it's a complete nightmare. So a lot of people think as well, this is a revolution for rich people, and they're leaving the people in need aside.
There are plenty of other criticisms too.
Ils roulent comme des nazes, surtout les villes libres. Je suis pas contre, les pistes cyclables c'est bien pour les cyclistes.
He says people ride like idiots, especially those that use the city bike scheme. They're a disaster. I'm not against bike lanes, they're good for cyclists, but some of the changes are ugly.
Even an ugly bike lane could help encourage cycling and bring down emissions.
Wouldn't just not buying a big lump of metal manufactured with energy probably from coal power stations, with rare metals shipped across the world in its battery, which runs on electricity that isn't necessarily from renewable sources, wouldn't not having that be better?
Okay, so look, yes, of course, that's a rhetorical question, and we both know the answer to that. If we could have a system of mass transportation that everybody wanted and everybody was quite happy to use, all those buses and metros, that would be fine. And if it ran on time and if it was clean, and maybe one day we'll get that, Kate. That is the beatific vision, isn't it? Then we have no congestion and we have a system of mass transportation that everybody loves and it works. But we're not there yet.
We started this program by talking about all the money and effort that's going into getting people into EVs. Does that mean that there's less left over for bikes and public transport?
After all, as Heather McLean says,
electric vehicles don't get people out of their cars. They don't lessen congestion.
Can you do both? That's the question. I think you have to take it short term. You have to say, right, what's our 10-year goal? Our 10-year goal is to break our monopoly with fossil fuels and clean our air and lower our carbon. And maybe the 20-year goal is to build that low-carbon, zero-emission mass transportation system. But you can't just desert one for the other.
Paris is trying to do both.
Estelle doesn't see many electric vehicles in her neighbourhood at the moment, but the city is planning to install thousands of charge points before it hosts the Olympics in 2024.
8,000 charge points in the next couple of years. That's a lot. What's driving this change?
I actually talked to the deputy mayor about that. David Belliard, maybe he will tell you better than me.
It's like a race, because we are speaking about Olympic Games. So we are making a race against climate change. This is the reason. This is the deadlines. We are trying to make this transformation very fast, but it's very complex, but it's very difficult. It's a race against climate change, and we have no choice to win this race.
Winning the race against climate change, though, is more like a decathlon than the 100 metres. You have to be good at more than one thing.
Not everyone is. In Brazil, Clarice says they've introduced 350 electric buses nationwide. It might sound like a lot, but the city of Sao Paulo alone has 14,000 buses.
Meanwhile, the government is providing incentives to industry to develop private electric vehicles, which get exported.
I asked Heather McLean, are we putting too much faith in EVs?
I think if anyone says that they alone are going to sufficiently decarbonize the road transport sector, then that is definitely too much faith. I think we have to look at this range of measures to really make a big difference and reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
So, where are we?
If you need a vehicle and can afford one, drive an electric one. But examine that need closely.
Investments into making these more affordable and practical should be welcomed.
So long as they don't come at the expense of public transit.
But if we really want to win this race against climate change, we can't just transform our transport. We need to transform our culture.
Meet George Jetson.
There's this old cartoon from the 1960s, The Jetsons.
It's set in space. It starts with George and his family leaving home in a private flying saucer.
Along the way, the kids get to jettison off in their own private spaceships, which take them to school.
Clarice in Rio says we need to change the channel.
In the past, we had this vision of the future. We would be like the Jetsons. We would all be in our private vehicle going everywhere. And I think still nowadays, we still have this vision, which is like a nostalgic vision. But this is not only dated, I think this is quite risky. The city of the future should be a city we are all walking, we are all cycling, and we are proud of our public transport system. And not a city that we all just want to have the latest EV in our garages.
Thanks to producer Sophie Eastaugh, researcher Natasha Fernandez, series producer Alex Lewis, and the man who makes the mix, Tom Brignall.